Hey, welcome everyone to another episode of the 3&D podcast, and we got a good one today. It's our updated playoff bracket prediction. Now that the regular season is close to over, we still have the last two play-in games remaining, but I think we have a pretty good idea of where we stand with our playoff brackets going in. And like last time, we'll start with the Eastern Conference. So, Rashab, if you want to kick it off, we can go series by series and see who you got.
Yeah, this is gonna be fun because I think everybody's been waiting for this time of the season to come around, and the playoffs is always a fun time. And let's be real, the playing games don't really matter because that eight seed is getting demolished in both the East and the West. So
Never
we
know.
don't, we, no, we do know. Let's don't beat around the bush. We do know they're gonna get torched, and so we don't need to wait for that playing game stuff to finish. So the first series is gonna be Miami, which is the one seed in the East, against either of Atlanta or Cleveland, whoever wins this playing game tonight. As of this recording, we don't know who's won yet. So it's going to be either Atlanta or Cleveland. Either way, doesn't matter. I have Miami in four against either one of them. Miami is the best 3 point shooting team in the league in terms of 3 point percentage. They play great defense, fourth in the league in defensive rating. And really and truly, these teams just don't have the weapons to compete with a balanced roster like Miami's. They got talent up and down that roster. They don't really have a weakness in their starting lineup. Really, they have they have a good amount of offensive creation to easily get them out of the first round, which is why they're a one seed, and they haven't even necessarily been healthy all year, so they might even be better than their record indicates. They also have depth, and I think that depth is going to help their starters get some rest in the first round, where their bench leads the league in points per game at 40.5 points per game. They already play at a slower pace. They're 28th in the league in pace, so they're kind of geared up and tailored toward playoff type basketball, and I think it'll make for an easy first round series regardless of who they play as an eight seed. So Miami and four for me. That's an easy one. What do you have?
Yeah, similar sort of line. So if it's Cleveland, I think it's five, and Atlanta, I gave them five as well. I wouldn't be
Okay.
surprised if that went to six, just giving, I guess, the Hawks a little bit of credit for their deep run last year. But you said a really key point there that Miami has the depth to really let their starters have an off first round, like not necessarily take it completely off, but not really be stretched to the point where they're playing high 30 minutes a game. Yeah, like I mean, Atlanta really impressed in the play-in game, but I don't really think the play-in tournament really has too much value because I think I mentioned this before, maybe off the air, but like it's literally 7 to 10 seeds playing on who should be the bottom tier of the playoffs. Like anything they do in those games really should be taken with a grain of salt. But yeah, Miami is the best team in the East record wise. They do have the best depth, and they've already dealt with a lot of lineup mixture with all the injuries that they've had. So I think they'll be definitely be prepared, and yeah, they should easily walk through it in five.
Yeah, agreed. So Miami moves on. Let's get to the 2 versus 7 series because this one's going to be a fun one with huge upset potential here. Boston versus Brooklyn. I have
Define upset.
Well, I mean, by definition, in this case, upset would be the second seed losing to the seventh seed. We Now people are gonna make the argument that Brooklyn's not a true seven seed. In my opinion, they are a true seven seed because they played 82 games and this is where they ended up. 82, actually 83 games because they had to win the playing game.
Mhm.
Uh, so I am going with Boston in six. So normally like the one key factor usually is that who has the best player in the series, and I think Kevin Durant is the best player in the series. I don't think that's debatable. Jason Tatum's gotten a lot better this year. We still have to see if he can do it consistently. But Boston as a team, and this is assuming they're healthy. So their standing so far, everything they've accomplished during the year has basically been with a full roster of health, and they are going to be missing Robert Williams. So that's a key piece that they're missing. So we have to factor that in. But even then, Boston leads the league in defensive rating. They're second behind Phoenix in net rating. Boston's net rating is 7.4 and Phoenix's net rating is 7.5. That's a very, very close net rating. And Phoenix is a runaway first place in the league team that everybody agrees is super deep, well
Yep.
coached, no real weakness on that roster. And Boston is right there with Phoenix. They're ninth in the league in offensive rating. Brooklyn's 10th. So people are going to say, oh, Brooklyn's a better offensive team. Not really when Boston's ranked higher than them offensively, and they play at a slow pace. Boston plays They're 24th in the league in pace, and Brooklyn is 11th. So Brooklyn wants to play faster. Boston's actually more geared to play a more playoff, grind it out, slow it down type of game, and I think Brooklyn's capable of doing that because they have a guy like Kevin Durant who you don't really have an answer for. He's gonna go and he can get his whenever he wants. We saw that in the play-in game when it got down to
Hmm.
a 6 point game. He was able to. They didn't need to run an offense. They just gave the ball to Kevin Durant and said, "Go get us a bucket." He did it 2 or 3 times in a row, kind of iced that game and put it away and secured Brooklyn's spot in the seventh seed. So, but I just think Boston's overall talent, just up and down that roster, the camaraderie, the chemistry, and what they're able to do defensively, where defense really starts to matter in the playoffs. But not only does Boston score more efficiently than Brooklyn, they're significantly better defensively,
Yep,
and their shot profile is a lot better. I think Brooklyn's one of the teams that relies most on scoring from the mid range, and they're good at it, and that's partly because of Kevin Durant. But Boston scores mostly from the paint and from three, and that's a great scoring profile that I think can translate well into the playoffs as well. Helps their offensive efficiency. So I just think a combination of Boston's defense, their offense, is going to be too much to overcome. And then you have Kyrie as the X factor, and my opinions on Kyrie have never been favorable. So I'll use that word, favorable. So
it's a good word.
I think Kyrie makes Brooklyn worse. I think if they just ran the offense through Kevin Durant and said, "Listen, Kevin, go get your buckets." Like I brought this up a lot of times off the air, maybe in that game where KD had 55 against Atlanta. Kyrie had more shots than him at a much worse percentage, and he just lacked the awareness to give the ball to KD. I think that those, especially given that Kyrie's playing in Boston, and those Boston fans are going to try to get in his head and try to make the series about Kyrie's revenge versus Boston or Boston's revenge on Kyrie, and they're going to have all these narratives and storylines going on at the time. Especially if Kyrie has a great game, you're going to have the Brooklyn media sort of stirring up that narrative. Or if Boston shuts down Kyrie and Boston takes a 1-0 or a 2-0 lead and Kyrie struggles, then you're going to have
Yep,
the narrative going the other way. So I think a lot of Brooklyn's success is going to depend on Kyrie's ability to tune the media out, stay within the team's game plan, and understand his role. And that's something I don't think he's ever been able to do. This is a guy who left LeBron James after winning a championship. So I just can't see Kyrie being a positive factor in this series. For me, it's Boston. It's Boston in six,
cool.
and it's going to be a good series, but Boston's the better team.
Okay. Before I start, I'll just let you know I also have Boston in
Oh,
six.
okay. I thought you'd have Brooklyn.
No, no, no. Brooklyn is a bad team. I don't even care if they beat the Cavs in the play-in because really, like I said, you can only take a grain of salt with those games. And to be fair, they didn't even beat them convincingly. But I think the biggest issue is Brooklyn can't defend. And something you mentioned with that first series with Miami and then with Boston is that these teams already play at a lower pace. So if you're going to come with like a Brooklyn and be like, okay, they played generally with a high pace, generally like it's the lowest common denominator that decides how the game is run. So if Boston wants to play it slower, they will play it slower, no matter how fast Brooklyn brings up the ball or plays at that speed. And a lot of the reason Brooklyn plays at that high pace is because they can't defend, right? So you might as well just overcommit on one end of the court. With that being said, I don't think the gap between Jason Tatum and Kevin Durant is that large. When you mentioned
Wow.
when you mentioned the best player in a series usually decides how a series goes, the floor is so high in the NBA right now. Like back then, like the best player would essentially gap their best player with ease, where it's like, okay, it doesn't matter what you do, this sort of person controls the whole series. So similar to
Oh,
like
I get what
how
you're saying.
Giannis versus the Suns last year. Like the Suns were the better team. They looked better equipped, but like there was a point in that series where it's like it doesn't matter what they do, even if the scoreline wasn't reflecting it, everyone just knew in the back of their mind it's like, okay, Milwaukee's going to win. Like you just have that feeling because he is that much better than everybody else on the court. And
I
if
like where
Brooklyn
you're going
can't
with this.
play, yeah, if Brooklyn can't play any defense, let's just say Jason Tatum is 80% of Kevin Durant. That's with good defense being played on KD and almost no defense being played on Jason Tatum. I don't
Right.
think that's a big enough gap for Brooklyn to win the series. So I'm
I
not
agree
saying
with that.
Jason Tatum is close in skill level to Kevin Durant. I just don't think like he gaps them that bad by saying, "Oh, he's the best player in a series. They should win." It's like, well, there's a lot of other factors being considered, and Boston's best player isn't that far out of the round. You know what I mean? It's not like they're playing with scraps.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I like that, and I think I agree. Like if Jason Tatum just plays like how he's been playing in this regular season, the gap between him and KD is really not all that big at all. Especially if you factor in that Boston has the pieces and the tools to guard KD, and Brooklyn really doesn't have anyone to guard unless KD starts expending his energy trying to guard Tatum, which
Yep.
I don't think is a good strategy. Tatum's gonna run roughshod over that Brooklyn defense, like you said, and the gap really isn't that narrow. That closes the gap. Like good defense on KD versus bad defense on Tatum, and Tatum
Yep.
just plays the way he's been playing all year. Yeah, the gap's really not that big. KD's still the better player, but the gap isn't big enough to overcome, like you said.
Yep. And then even if you consider injury history and stuff like that, like Brooklyn needs everything to go their way to win the series, whereas one injury really derails the whole thing for them.
Yeah, they're top heavy.
Yeah, like they have more, I guess, risk and volatility of what can go wrong, whereas Boston's better equipped to, I guess, weather the storm.
Yeah, so I wanna bring up one point and I want to get your thought
Sure.
on it too. So there's been reports that Ben Simmons could come back around like games somewhere between game 4 and game 6 in the series, assuming it goes that far. We both think it's gonna go that far, but KD did an interview today where he thinks like I guess he's stating that he's not relying on Ben Simmons to come back. Like he's not expecting Ben Simmons to
Hmm.
come back. Do you think the series changes if Ben Simmons comes back midway through the series? Let's say Boston's up. Let's say the series is 2-2 or Boston's up 3-1,
Sure.
and then Ben Simmons comes back for Game 5.
Sure.
Do you think that tips the
So,
scale in Brooklyn's favor?
so I just want to point out, I don't think he's coming back just personally, but let's
Okay.
say he does. I don't really think it does because I think Ben Simmons is a playoff liability when he's on the court. Like one person on the court doesn't make you that much of a better defensive team. And plus, we really haven't seen any Brooklyn Nets practices or any stuff like that. Like, how integrated is he really going to be into that lineup?
I think
So,
that's the real question is the integration piece because I think adding Ben Simmons, if you had some continuity and some fluidity with Ben Simmons in the lineup in terms of him being familiar with how Brooklyn plays, their styles, their
yep.
plays, coaching, whatever, like where KD and Kyrie
And
like the ball on offense. I think Ben Simmons could bother Jason Tatum because he has the length and the strength, the quickness to do it. That's what makes him a good defender. But I think bringing him in into a series that's going to be so close as it is in terms of the two teams that are competing against each other and throwing him into the fire and not giving him a chance to I don't even
so,
know if that's a like that's a recipe for
so
disaster.
I don't see any value in bringing Ben Simmons into the series because I think the Brooklyn Nets know they're not winning the championship this year. They haven't been too confident when speaking about their teams. If you look at Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving, and by bringing
Yeah.
him back, you're essentially saying, okay, this is our full power roster, but it's easier to just keep him out, blame. It's like, oh, we didn't have Ben Simmons this year. James Harden wanted out. We'll just regroup for next year. Like, and they'll have those excuses to live
Yeah,
off
yeah,
of.
like you have baked in excuses, like you have an
Yeah,
out.
yeah.
Yeah.
So like this year isn't win or bust for them. They've already baked in the excuses, and if they lose in the first round, like they'll be forgotten about, I guess, after the first week.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. I personally don't think he comes back either. I think it's a smokescreen. I think they're trying to do it to throw Boston off, like in terms of their game plan and their series planning. But even if he does, I don't think it swings it enough.
Yep,
And I think the chemistry thing is going to be a big deal,
yep.
where you're going to lose on offense in the sense that you have to move KD and Kyrie off the ball. So I don't think it helps them that much. But okay, we agree. But surprisingly, we both agree that Boston moves on. I didn't expect that, but all right. Let's go to Milwaukee and Chicago. That's the 3-6 series.
All right.
I got Milwaukee in 4.
Okay,
I
I
don't.
have them in five.
Okay, I don't. I don't. I said this in the when we did the early season predictions too. I don't think Chicago's good at all. They were a 2 seed when we did this earlier in the season, and that was they weren't really a 2 seed. Like they had overachieved significantly to that point. They were winning close games. Their margin of victory wasn't that good. Their net rating wasn't that good. And even if you look at it now at the end of the season, those factors and variables, even after they've dropped to 6, still still give me the same conclusion. Like Chicago's one of the only playoff teams, I think maybe even the only playoff team that has a negative net rating.
They do. Yep.
So that's a sign of a bad team, not a good team. Like they were holding on for dear life in terms of making the playoffs. If it wasn't for their strong start, I would bet that they might not even be in the playoffs altogether. They have a horrible record against the top 3 teams in the East or top 4 teams in the East. I think last I saw was like 0 for 16 or something. Like they just can't beat any of the talented teams in the East at the top. I don't think this is going to be close. Milwaukee's going to flip that switch. They know it's playoff time. It's go time. You're going to see a different Giannis, a different Milwaukee team.
Yep.
They're going to come out focused, ready to go, and ready to defend that championship and try to get another one for Giannis's legacy. Chicago relies a lot on mid range. For they're the highest percentage of their points in the league is from the mid range.
Shout out Demar.
Shout out Demar, that's what he does. But I just don't think that that's a recipe for success. And Milwaukee's got the wing defenders in Drew and Chris Middleton to make life difficult for your Zach Levines and your DeMar DeRozans on Chicago. And Chicago really has no answer at all for Giannis. Like their bigs just cannot guard Giannis. Their guards and their wings are too small to guard Giannis.
Yep.
Uh, Giannis is going to run roughshod over them. It's an easy win for Milwaukee in four. I'd be surprised if Chicago gets one.
Yeah, we'll keep it short and sweet. I think the Bucks win in five. I don't think it's going to be close. I don't even think Giannis really even needs to run rough shot at all. And
Yeah,
you mentioned
Milwaukee's
it
just a
too.
better team.
Yeah, the Bulls haven't been able to win against the big three teams, and now we're asking them to beat Milwaukee four times. Even if Giannis was like out game one for the rest of the series, I still think they lose. So
I agree. Yep.
yeah, they have a negative zero point 0.4 differential on the entire season for points, so they couldn't even, I guess, beat down the worst teams. And
Yeah.
even might not seem that significant, but they're not entirely healthy as well. Like I think this year it was just a good year for them, an experiment year. They put the whole team together, and next year they'll obviously be looking to improve. But this isn't their year to make a playoff run.
Yeah, and like they're missing Lonzo. I think he's done for the
Yeah,
season, and they've had some of their pieces in and out too. So, but I honestly, it wouldn't matter. Even if they were healthy, it would not matter. Milwaukee's a bad matchup for them just because they have nobody to guard Giannis, anyways. Milwaukee in four. We both agree Milwaukee moves on. That's easy. Let's get to the 4-5 because this is an interesting series. I think everybody. This is the series with the most potential to go seven. I think, and
sure.
probably can end in an upset. This is probably the highest chance of an upset just because the Raptors are underrated in a sense. They don't get the same media attention as some of the American teams, but I have Toronto winning in seven.
Okay.
And it's because I don't trust Doc Rivers and James Harden. I think Embiid's going to have a great series. Embiid historically, let me say this. Embiid historically has always struggled against the Raptors. Dating back to that 2019 series, he was horrible offensively. I think he averaged like 17 points on like sub 40% shooting, which is terrible for a center.
Yep.
And Embiid has himself come out and said that Toronto's defense gives him headaches and it makes it really difficult for him. They've done that this year as well. They force him into a lot of turnovers. They play a frantic, hectic style of defense. So they're gonna do their best to take Embiid out of the game. And they listen, you can only do that to some degree. Like Embiid's, this is you're talking about an MVP caliber, probably top three to top five talent in the league. He's gonna get his, and I think to some degree that's just the way it's gonna go. But the key thing is James Harden. James Harden has not looked anything like himself for the last few months, minus those like first few games when he got traded to Philly, which even on the pod I said when that trade happened, although it looked really good, I had a couple reasons to be skeptical, and one of those reasons was every time James Harden gets traded or every time he has a fresh start with a new team, you start to see that like he starts off really well and then he just tapers off and like kind of goes back to who he's always been, which is a ball dominant, dribble, 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 isolate,
Hmm.
and kind of take the team out of its flow. And it works when you're average when you're capable of getting 35 a game and get to the free throw line 15 times a game. Listen, Philly relies a lot on free throws. I think the refs swallow their whistle a little bit in the playoffs. Being dependent on the free throw line is not necessarily a good thing. And Harden and Embiid are both very dependent on the free throw line. That's not to say Embiid isn't capable. He is. But Harden, the way he's played this year, I have question marks about whether or not how capable he is of scoring without getting to the free throw line. I think Nick Wright or somebody had this stat on one of the shows. He hasn't had a game with more than 10 field goals made since January.
Yep.
That's a 4 month stretch where he hasn't made more than 10 field goals, which is not a lot for what we say is a superstar or a high level player.
Yep.
So I think that's where the Sixers are in trouble. And look, Nick Nurse is going to coach circles around Doc Rivers. Doc Rivers doesn't even have his rotations figured out. Philly really struggles with Embiid off the floor. The Raptors love to crash the offensive glass. They love to force turnovers, get out and run. And they just have the wings and the length to make both Harden and Embiid's life miserable. Now, I want to get to the X factors of this series. The Raptors will need to force turnovers and will need to run to get some offense going because in the half court they struggle. but I think the guard play in the series is what's going to tip the scale either for the Raptors or for the Philly. If Tyrese Maxey, Tobias Harris, I'll say guard and wing, but Tyrese Maxey, Tobias Harris, and James Harden can play up to their standards, Philly's going to win the series. But
Yep.
if Fred VanVleet, who historically has struggled against Philly's length and Philly's sort of aggressiveness on defense, if Fred VanVleet, one, he has knee issues, we know that. He's come on record and done interviews and stuff saying that, look, my knee is what it is at this point. I don't see it getting better until the off season. He's just going to roll the dice and go with what he is. And then Gary Trent Jr., who's also struggled against Philly this year. If those two guys can play up to their standard, the way they've played against other teams this year, the way they've played, like Freddie was an All Star this year. If he can play at his All Star level, Gary Trent Jr. gives you good percentages, good defense,
Hmm.
shot making abilities, shot creation ability. I think that tips the favors in the Raptors scale. And we know what we're going to get with Pascal, who's had a great season, borderline All NBA season. And I just think that at the end of the day, the coaching plan that Nick Nurse is going to put in place and Harden struggles will be too much for Philly to overcome, and the Raptors win. This is just a bad matchup for Philly. I think the Raptors win in seven. This
Okay.
is the team that the Philly does not want to see.
Well, it's a good thing they're going to exercise their demons early because I have the Sixers winning in 5.
In five?
This, yeah, if I could just go, this is one of those series where you mentioned the Kevin Durant thing is probably the best player in the series.
Yeah.
So me
Okay,
and
I
you
agree
look
with
at
that.
James Harden differently, but I think Philadelphia, the gap between Embiid and the Raptors' best player, whoever you want it to be, I think it's Pascal, but you can mention it's Fred. I know he's had an unbelievable season, but I think at that the gap between them is massive. So even if it does come down to the guard play, if they can't guard Embiid, who I think he's gotten better every year since the last 3 years, and yeah, like I mean, he was pretty good when the Raptors beat them in the playoffs when they won the championship that year. But I think he's been improving significantly each year. I think this is a bit of a revenge tour for him because deep down, I think that Sixers team know they probably should have beat the Raptors that year. And with how it all panned out with Golden State, they probably look at it as like that was our chance to win a ring, and then we couldn't cash in on it. So I definitely think there's a revenge element where Embiid's like, we cannot lose to these guys out of any. They'll gladly lose to anybody else, but if they lose to the Raptors again, that's going to look really bad, and you blow up the whole process over there. With regards
Okay,
to,
that's an interesting point. I actually kind of like that. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, there won't be recovery coming back from that. Like first time, okay, you could say it's Kawhi, and then it's like, okay, like what's the problem? Why can't you beat the Raptors this time? Then it's just underachieving. But with James Harden, I think he does. What's it called? He didn't look that great in the regular season, but at the same time, when he
Whoa,
got
that's being
traded,
kind. That's being kind. He
but
didn't
when
look
he
that
got
good. He
traded,
looked
I said I
terrible.
wasn't going to count the regular season for anything for him because this is what it matters. He's going to take off the fat suit and he's going to show okay he's ready for this.
Okay,
And I think
wait,
deep
wait, wait, wait,
down,
wait, wait, wait,
okay,
wait.
go ahead. Yeah, yeah.
Hold on, hold on, hold on, hold on.
Okay,
Let me ask you this. Let me ask you this.
yep,
Can we agree that historically James Harden has not performed as well as he has in the playoffs compared to how he normally does in the regular season?
that's correct.
Okay, so if we agree on that,
Can we agree that
can,
he's exploded in postseason games?
yes,
Okay,
yes, when he's,
so
but
he's capable.
he's capable, no doubt,
Yep.
he's capable, and that's where I agree that if he plays
Now,
up to James Harden type standards,
is he
but the thing,
capable if he's not the best player on the court and everyone's going to be double teaming Embiid where he has more space?
but I don't. Okay, so if you're doubling Embiid, you're not coming off Harden though. You'll sag off of Maxi or Tobias or Matisse Thybulle for
Yep.
the games that are going on in
And
Philly. Like you make someone else beat
no,
you.
no,
You're
in
not.
that,
It's not
yeah, in
gonna be
that
Harden.
sense. But I think Harden's an elite playmaker to put his ego aside and like make the right call because he's lost a lot in the playoffs, and this is really what matters to him. Like he doesn't care if he's shooting poorly in the regular season. People will all forget that if Philly, shows up in the playoffs.
I just think if he continues to shoot, he's I think he's shooting like just above 40% from the
Yep.
field, like 30 from three. If he continues to shoot this poorly, they can't win.
Yep.
You cannot have that many empty possessions on offense against a good defensive team
Hmm.
like the Raptors, who are gonna like isolate your weaknesses. Like if somebody,
So like I agree this series can be close, but like the Raptors have to go game for game with them. Like if Philly gets a 2 game gap on them, like this is over quick.
Okay.
The Raptors have a much smaller margin of error than the
That,
Sixers do.
that I agree with because the Sixers have Embiid as the best player. I guess the
Yeah.
question is, I don't think James Harden is the second best player in the series. I think Pascal is the second best player in the series based on what I've seen from Harden this year.
Yes. But I've seen postseason Pascal, spin move champion.
um,
Let's not forget these guys. Everyone was roasting him.
yeah, fair. No,
Yep.
you're right. You're right. That can be used against
And
him too.
another
So,
thing I forgot to mention, Kyle Lowry's always been the leader for the Raptors. This is their first year without them. So I agree that Nick Nurse will outcoach Doc Rivers, probably by a mile. But from a veteran standpoint, maturity, like who's the Raptors leader? Is it Pascal or Fred? Like they're really missing a big piece of experience there from the championship roster. So I
I
just think like there's a chance for things to go south. And like I don't know, I don't want to say it's immaturity is the word, but I think Philadelphia is more skilled. And another fun fact: Joel Embiid averages more free throw attempts per game in the postseason than he does in the regular season.
oh, interesting.
Yeah, that would caught me by off guard as well. But
Okay.
yeah.
So I will say I agree with your points. But I also think that the pressure is on Philly. Raptors are playing with house money. They're the lower seeded team. Nobody expected them to get this far anyways. I think the Raptors play a little bit more free and a little bit more loose and just go out there and do what they do. And if it works, it works. If it doesn't, so be it. Nobody expected us to get this far anyways. Now I think if the Raptors come in and steal game one, and this pressure goes on Philly now to win game two, and Philly does, like, you have Harden who's choked under pressure, you have
Mhm.
Doc Rivers who's terrible under pressure, like these key pieces on Philly that are just gonna struggle if the pressure starts to mount is where, like, that's like an intangible that's it's hard to measure. It's hard to quantify it,
So
but
I guess just talking about last year, do you think the Sixers choked under pressure to Atlanta, or that was more so Ben Simmons choking under pressure?
uh I think both.
Okay.
Listen, that series shouldn't have been that close in the first place.
No,
Let's
I
put it
agree with
that
that.
way. So I think that part is the Sixers kind of choking, and it showed on Doc Rivers' ability to kind of close out a series. They were up 3-1 that series, right? That was the third time Doc Rivers blew the 3-1 lead. Was that a
Ooh,
3-1
I'm not
series? I
sure
don't
if that one
remember.
was a 3-1 lead.
I can't remember. But anyways, I think either way, I think we both agree that Philly was a more talented team in that series, right?
Yep.
And that series should have never been that close. So yeah, Ben Simmons choked in those key moments for in like those games that were obviously highlighted where he could have dunked the ball or laid it up and he passed it up for a three. So yes, Ben Simmons choked too. Don't get me wrong, but I don't think it should have been that close in the first place. Philly should have won that series more convincingly and more easily, being the better team, having the better players at the time than Atlanta. And that series is very reminiscent of this series. Now the Raptors don't have a Trey Young type of talent, but they're the team that has no pressure. They're playing free. They do have talent. They're much better coached, which is why I think that this series has upset potential. But
Yeah,
you're
that's
right
fine.
that Philly has the better players. Philly should win the series. I'll say it that way. I think they're going to lose because the pressure is going to get to them. James Harden isn't what he used to be, and Doc Rivers is a terrible coach. That's why I think they're going to lose. But you're right in that they should win. So you
Yeah.
got Philly in five. I
Yeah,
got
I think they
Toronto.
win convincingly. We'll see.
Okay, we got Toronto. I got Toronto in seven in an upset. All right, let's move to the second round. So in your case, you would have Miami versus Philly. I have
Yes.
Miami versus Toronto. I'll go first because I think this is easy. Miami in five versus
Sure.
Toronto. They're just deeper, better, more experienced. The coaching difference is just not that big. Eric Spoelstra is a great coach. Nick Nurse is a great coach. Miami's strengths are kind of like what Toronto excels in. The only thing that Miami does poorly that Toronto can capitalize on is turnovers. Toronto forces a lot of turnovers. They deflect the ball a lot. They play, like I said, that frantic style of defense. Miami's 28th in the league, I think, in turnovers. So they are prone to turning the ball over. If Toronto can capitalize on that, they can make it a more competitive series. But Miami's talent up and down that roster is just better than Toronto's, like, point blank. It's going to be tough for Toronto to score in the half court, given Miami's defensive prowess and
Yep.
Toronto's offensive struggles in the half court, anyways. So I think it's a easy Miami in five. I'm pretty sure you agree in terms of who the winner would be if it was Miami versus Toronto. So let's get to yours,
Sure.
because Miami versus Philly is probably gonna be a little more competitive.
I have Miami taking them in 7. So
Okay.
similar sort. It's sort of like the Toronto series where I think Eric Spoelstra is a much better coach than Doc Rivers. I put him on that Nick Nurse tier.
Yep.
And I know Jimmy Butler has a lot to say about his teammates in Philadelphia. So I think he knows them well, and I think Miami has a much better roster than Philadelphia does,
I do
and
too.
they have somebody that can defend Embiid as well with Bam, and I just think the Miami Heat are have a nice side of the bracket. I'm not gonna lie, I think they have a nice side of the bracket. I have them going to the Eastern Conference Finals,
They
and
do
I
have a
think
good side of the bracket.
yeah, and that's pretty much it. I said 7, but I wouldn't be surprised if it was sooner than that. Mainly because I don't think Joel Embiid has ever played a full series to begin with. He's always had like a game to sit out with a nagging injury, stuff like that. I don't think James Harden's in great shape. Like this is gonna fall off the rails somewhere.
Yeah,
You know what I
I
mean?
think
Like
I think I
durability is a key thing.
yeah, I agree with you. I think
Now,
Miami's
now,
got
now, the Heat have had a lot of injuries, but I've seen they've missed games. Like Jimmy Butler's missed games for nasal congestion, stuff like that. Like they don't have real
like not
injuries.
real
Like
injuries.
yeah,
Yeah,
when it
yeah.
comes yeah when it comes to the postseason, they'll be there.
Yeah. Yeah, like it's just games missed pretty much for rest that they're chalking up to some dumb injury.
Exactly.
I agree with you. I think Miami's got the defensive the players to guard Philly. They got Jimmy Butler to just hound James Harden, and this year there's less of a reliance on Jimmy Butler on offense, so he can expend some of that energy on defense.
Yep.
They have Bam for Embiid, and then they just have the pieces. They have Lowry for their championship experience and the veteran sort of leadership, and
Hmm.
Lowry can score and kind of facilitate and score on an as needed basis. Yeah, he's not some superstar level player, but he's as solid as they come at the point guard position. I just think they're the deeper, better team. So I agree. It's a competitive series, but I would think Miami takes that series as well.
I also think their best players are more in shape than Philadelphia's best players. Like
Oh
Joel
yeah,
Embiid's a big guy.
everybody knows about that Heat culture and their rigorous like body fat.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's not even close. I don't even
like
think that's
like
that's
all those people that are saying, "Oh, if James Harden's hamstring didn't act out, they would have beat Giannis and the Bucks last year." Well, it's like maybe he should be in shape and actually training all the time, so he avoids, minimizes the risk of getting a hamstring injury.
yeah, I agree with that. That like you can't. It's easy to say,
Like
oh, if I didn't get injured, same. It's the same thing with
mitigating
AD.
injuries is a skill as much
It's
as
a
it is
skill.
is luck.
It's a skill you can train to reduce your risk of
Hmm.
injury. Like guys who are perpetually injured,
Like the
we
soft tissue ones, not
the
necessarily
soft
like
tissue
torn
ones.
ACL. Yeah.
Right. So like hamstring injuries and stuff. Yeah, I can almost say with certainty that James Harden's weight can contribute to that injury, either one happening or two the severity of it and the recovery from that injury. Like if you're out of shape, you're more likely to get injured. Like if you're heavier, there's more load on your legs, on your lower body. You're more likely to get hurt, and that recovery is going to take longer because now you're off your leg. You can't do cardio. You're probably gaining more weight. Like it's just like a snowball effect. Like if we're gonna say Steph Curry had chronic ankle injuries. He figured it out. Why can't these guys figure it out?
Yep.
Like, why can't Anthony Davis and why can't James Harden figure it out? Like, if you're going to be injured and that injury keeps coming back to haunt you, at some point, that's on you. You can't keep blaming injuries. At some point, that's on you. You have to take it serious and rehab it and put in the work. And I just don't think James Harden has ever put in the work into his body to be
Yep.
like this elite, deep playoff run type of guy where you can count on him to be there and not get injured and perform.
And Embiid has shown that as well, right? Because he
Same
can't
thing with
manage to play
Embiid.
a full series. Even with against the Hawks, I think he missed a game in the Eastern Conference Finals. He missed a game against the Raptors when we beat them in 7. Like that ultimately could have changed both those series.
That's right.
Yep.
Yeah, I agree with that. So yeah, I would get Miami if it was versus Philly as well. So either way, we both have Miami going on to the Eastern Conference Finals.
Yep.
Let's get to the other side of the bracket, the better side, the more competitive side. We got both of us have Boston versus Milwaukee, right? Yeah, we do. We
Yes,
both have
sir.
Boston versus Milwaukee in the Eastern Conference semis. I
Hmm.
think this is the real Eastern Conference Finals, by the way. This is the actual two best teams in the East going at it. I had a very hard time deciding who I think is going to win this series,
Okay.
but I'm going with Milwaukee in a very close 7. And I still am unsure about that pick because I still think Boston can win. Boston has all of the metrics that suggest that they're a finals level team, that they should be going to the NBA finals. That's what their metrics say. So I have a very hard time picking against Boston, but this is the Giannis factor coming in. So
So
I
this is the best player in the series actually matters factor, right?
yes, this is the best player in the
Okay.
series doing what the best player in the series does, going God mode, unguardable, and just willing Milwaukee to a win when they need it. Like the series is close enough that Giannis is a tipping factor. So I think Boston's got we talked about Boston's defense. I mentioned it earlier. You know, they're second in the league in defensive rating. They have a great net rating. They're a
Hmm.
great team. By pretty much every
Like they,
metric,
they
they're
have the
a
best
great
point
team.
differential in the NBA, even if you include their terrible start.
Yeah, that's right. Well, I have it like the net rating that I have is they're second to Phoenix. Phoenix is the best,
Oh, sorry, yeah,
and
yeah, best in the East is what I meant to say.
yeah, best in the East. They're far and away the best in the East, but and they're pretty much on par with Phoenix. It's zero point 0.1 difference. That's like a negligible difference. This is why I had a very hard time picking against Boston. But if I do the matchups, like Boston has the capability and the personnel to sort of wall up Giannis like Toronto did. But I also think that Giannis is a much better player now than he was in that series against Toronto, where he'll be more equipped to deal with that type of wall. And I also think
Yep.
Having Drew Holiday on their roster helps as a release valve for teams trying to wall up on Giannis. So Milwaukee has the pieces to guard the wings that Boston has.
Hmm.
Boston's offense is very heavily dependent on their wings in Jason Tatum and Jalen Brown.
Yep.
I would put Drew and Chris Middleton on those guys and let them go to work and try to make it as difficult as possible for those guys to score. Now, Boston can do the same thing the other way. They got Jason Tatum, who's actually a very underrated wing defender. He's actually a good, like a positive wing defender. You have Jalen Brown, who's a good wing defender. You have Al Horford, who can help create a wall. And then you have Robert Williams, who should be back for the series, assuming Boston gets this far. They have the players and the personnel to make up a wall. And then I haven't even mentioned Defensive Player of the Year candidate Marcus Smart might be the best point guard defender in the league, up there with Drew. So like
Yep.
you don't really have a weak link in Boston's defense. And that has never boded well for Milwaukee historically or for Giannis historically when he plays against a team that he cannot attack a particular matchup. But I just think that at the end of the day, Giannis's game has come so far from the last time we saw a team try to build a wall on him,
Yep.
where he's actually a reliable mid-range shooter. You can put him in the high post and he can create from the high post. He's a much better playmaker than he used to be, where he
Yeah,
can get the rest of his team
that's what
involved.
I wanted to add. I don't. I think the wall theory doesn't work anymore.
I agree, and
Yeah.
I think that Boston can try it, and I think it'll work to some degree, but I just cannot see Giannis like he can just go God mode and turn it on and get into a different type of like he's just in a different level compared to some of the guys in the league. And Boston can try, and I think they have a good shot in this series. This series to me is still a toss up, but if I had to pick, I'm picking Milwaukee in seven,
Yep.
and it's solely because Giannis is the best player in the series.
Yeah. So to me, this series looks a lot like the last time Boston was in the Eastern Conference Finals when they played the Cavs,
Okay.
where that Cavs team had no business. They beat Indiana in seven. They beat another team in seven. And they went to no, they swept Toronto
They
after
swept
that,
Toronto and
and
then
then they went to play Boston.
Boston 1-7,
But
I
like,
think.
yeah, and solely because LeBron was even Jason Tatum dunked on him that game. But in
Yep.
the end, the best player reigns supreme, and I think that's sort of what's going to happen here with Milwaukee. I actually have them winning in six, and I think what this series is really going to highlight is Boston is very well equipped defensively across their team. They rely heavily on the wings and guard play, and it's going to show you that it doesn't necessarily matter unless you don't have that elite big man. Because even now, like the MVP race, we could say that three big men essentially led the league in the race.
Yep.
And I think it's because it's such a scarce resource to get a guy that's that talented at that position. It's going to come to the point where it's like we can't really necessarily do anything unless we actually have a Giannis stopper. And that's going to be much harder said than done. Similar like when everyone back then was like, "Oh yeah, we traded for the LeBron stopper," and then he just absolutely cooks them, right? Like I don't
Yep.
think there is a Giannis stopper there. So unless you have an elite big that can really match up with him. And as long as Milwaukee stays healthy, which they are, they're healthy right now. Um, it's really the ball's in their court. It's for them to lose.
Yeah, and so it was really hard for me to pick against Boston, but it's just unfortunate that Boston gets matched up with Milwaukee. And like I said, this to me is a real Eastern Conference Finals, and the team that wins this series for me goes to the finals. I think both these teams are better than Miami. So
Yep.
moving on to that next round, with that said, I have Milwaukee beating Miami in six.
Yep.
Um,
Me too.
Same thing. Bam just too small to guard Giannis. Giannis gonna bully him.
Hmm.
Miami turns the ball over a lot, which is not good. In the postseason, turnovers start to become more magnified the further you get into the playoffs, where the teams are more equipped to capitalize on these turnovers. And turning the ball over, especially live ball turnovers, with Giannis on the other team, that's pretty much a guaranteed bucket. Like you're
Yep.
not stopping Giannis on a fast break unless you send it to the free throw line, which is going to put your team in the penalty early in the quarter. So I think the turnovers thing is really going to hinder Miami, and Milwaukee doesn't really have a weakness like a turnover like that. And again, they're just very well, two way. They're a two-way team. They got all their players are pretty defensive minded, and they're not really liabilities on offense. I'd say for guys who are defensive minded. So for me, it's Milwaukee in six. And if Boston gets through Milwaukee somehow, I have Boston over Miami as well. So one way or another, the team that comes out of the Boston Milwaukee series is the team that's going to the finals. For
Yep.
me, that's Milwaukee.
Yeah, I don't really have that much more to add on that. I think Milwaukee beats Miami in six as well. They're the better team. And honestly, for a lot of people that might say that Bam has shut down Giannis before in that series, Giannis is like one of those guys that like once you get him once, he improves, and then now it's
He
immediately the
figures it
series
out.
after that he absolutely cooks them, and it's like okay, like you had your window, he's figured it out. On to the next one. Like
That's
I don't
right.
think Bam and Giannis is that good of a matchup at all
That's right.
defensively. But
So
yeah, Bucks and six.
yeah, so we both agree. We both have the Bucks going to the Eastern Conference Finals, or sorry, the NBA Finals. And we'll talk about the finals series in our Western Conference bracket, which
Hmm.
is going to be released after this segment. So let's hold off on discussing the finals until we do that Western Conference
Can do.
bracket. But I think the Eastern Conference is going to be a lot of fun. My favorite series, assuming Boston gets through Brooklyn, which we both think they will, is probably going to be that Boston versus Milwaukee series. That's
Ooh,
two juggernauts going at it, and I think that's going to be the best
that
series of the
that's
Eastern
probably the
Conference.
one for best basketball. But I'd love to see Boston and Brooklyn. Just
Oh,
the
for like the
series, all the
drama.
story. Yeah, yeah, yeah. That
For
to
the
me is the
drama,
most exciting one.
yeah. The Boston Brooklyn one's gonna have a ton of drama, and I think if Toronto gets off to a good start against Philly, like if Toronto steals game one, you're gonna see a ton of pressure turned up on Philly, and there's gonna be a lot of drama in that series too.
Yeah,
Yeah, I think it's gonna be fun next few months.
yeah. That settles the East.